rewatching The Sopranos.
Hell yeah.
Lately. The Sopranos, if you haven't watched it, if it's people in India watching it or people here, you should watch The Sopranos. It's just an incredible show.
Yeah.
Right? And I realize all narrative shows are actually very dharmic in a sense, because good narrative shows are always about transformations.
Yep.
Right. And that's really baked into everything that we're talking about in terms of Dharma, dharmic praxis in general. But I want to talk about The Sopranos, and I want to talk specifically. The Sopranos is sort of like it's a very dharmic tale in a sense. Or it's a very adharmic tale, but it's actually like, I think of it as a sort of the Rakshasa Dharma. Right? Yeah. The Dharma of a Rakshas, right? Which is Tony Soprano, a gangster, the mob boss of northern New Jersey, right? And to me, it's a very striking sort of dharmic story in that, first of all, it begins just like the Yoga Vasishta, just like the Bhagavad Gita, just like so many Hindu texts. It begins with an existential crisis from the hero, right? Yeah. Arjuna doesn't want to fight on the battlefield. Lord Rama is in a state of disillusionment and dejection about the world, right? And Tony Soprano, at the very beginning of The Sopranos, it's the exact same thing. And what is he doing? He's going to talk to a psychiatrist, right? Dr. Jennifer Melfi. And as we all know, psychiatry is just bootleg dharmic thinking. Anyway, that's just a joke, but it is. And we'll get into that a little bit later, right? And it's very interesting because even the structure of it is very similar in that he's experiencing this existential crisis within him right on the cusp of achieving power and becoming the boss of northern New Jersey. And right on the cusp of this, Tony is experiencing panic attack. My hair is on end. My hair is standing on end. My mouth is parched. Think about all the things Arjuna says right on the cusp. And that's kind of him experiencing a panic attack, right? Sure. Likewise, Tony Soprano is experiencing panic attacks. And why? Well, first of all, there's multiple reasons, right? But the first thing is that he has a conflict with his family. In order to achieve, right, his dharma, right, as the mob boss of New Jersey, in order to be the proper gangster, he is in conflict with his family, first of all. His uncle, who is his rival to be the boss of northern New Jersey mob, right? He's a sort of mini boss that he has to face. And then, of course, the big boss, which is his mother. Yeah. Similar to Arjuna. Arjuna loves his family. He doesn't want to have to fight his family, but he has to fight his family for the sake of dharma. Tony Soprano has to do this basically for the sake of his adharmic dharma, in a sense, right? Or his rakshasa dharma, as we're calling it here. And this is a consistent theme throughout the show, right? Is Tony is always having to, in order to exercise his duty, his dharma as a Rakshasa, he has to kill multiple people, right? He has to kill his best friend, Big Pussy Bumpin' right? And then he has to kill Jackie Jr., the son of his best friend, who he feels affection and love for. And then he has
Spoiler
to...
alert.
Spoiler alert, right? And then he has to kill his cousin, Tony Blundetto, right? In order to keep his mob family together and keep it functioning properly. And to me, that's identical to the dilemma of Arjuna, but it just happens to be for something adharmic. That's why I say this is a Rakshasa's dharma that we're exploring here. And it's also at the same time, it's a dharmic cautionary tale, right? And that this is a life that of a person who, like a Rakshasa, holds too dearly to materiality, right? Yeah. He's obsessed with materiality. His whole life revolves around sensual experiences, right? And this, as we know, is the persistent cause of suffering for all beings, right? Is this attachment to the materiality, this nescience, right? This veiling of the ultimate reality of Satchitananda, right? Of Parabrahman, of the ultimate reality. And for him, his whole life, he's following his dick everywhere. Like, let's just be real about it. That's what Tony Soprano does. He follows his dick everywhere, and everywhere, as a result, he's always landing himself into trouble, right? Whether it's in his home life with his family or in his life as a mob boss, various affairs that he's having lead him to make bad business decisions and things like that, his ego, his hubris, all of these things. Think about Ravana, and this is sort of like, if there was a Bhagavad Gita for Ravana, right, it would be The Sopranos in a way. Right. And so his life is completely dedicated to the sensual. And things come to to me, there's a real tipping point towards the end of the show in season 6. Things really come to a sort of dharmic head when Tony is shot by his uncle, who himself is in a state of dementia, and then he goes into a coma. And then something really remarkable happens. And this is straight out of the Yoga Vasishta. We talked earlier in previous episodes about the story of Leela. A little rewind. Story of Leela is when Vasishta is narrating the story of this woman named Leela, who is a queen and wants immortality, and is then led on a cosmic voyage by goddess Saraswati to understand that human beings and jivas exist on multiple timelines of reality, right? Multiple incarnations that are all projections of the self, and these are all illusory actually, right? And through the astral body, she's able to travel and see all the multiple versions of Leela, the half a dozen or so versions of Leela that exist that are all actually rooted in, one sage's meditations and desires, right? In a very humble little hut somewhere, right? And Tony experiences this exact same thing. He experiences something very similar, I should say, rather. He experiences his own story of Leela. Hey, Leela, I'm experiencing the story of Leela over here. And it's really amazing because Tony in his coma experiences his jiva in a different timeline. And in this other timeline, he's actually just an upstanding salesman, right? And he's a family man, and he doesn't have his New Jersey accent or anything, right? But we don't know his name. But you get the sense that this is who Tony wishes he could be, in a sense, right? Because he's not. The alternate version of him also wishes the opposite, right? Because in this version, he has like a nice, placid home life, and things are kind of nice. But he's still a very successful person, right, as a salesman. But in this other timeline that he's experiencing of himself, he like tries to have an affair, but his conscience won't let him, right? And there's things like that are happening. So it's funny. There's two oppositional things that are happening. This version of him almost wishes he could be a Tony Soprano type of being sort of adharmic and having the affair and living just by his impulses. Well, Tony, in some sense, yearns to live as somebody who is able to restrain the impulses, right? And it's amazing because he then also, on top of that, as this other alternate Tony, he's at this convention and he's like, hey, somebody left their briefcase in my room. It's some guy named Kevin Finnerty. Looks a lot like me too, but it's not me, obviously. I'm whoever I am. They don't say who he is. Yeah. But what we're seeing here is yet another potential jiva of Tony Soprano, right? Another possible projection of his consciousness, right? Of his individual jiva. And he's carrying around now this briefcase and this idea of this guy named Kevin Finnerty. And he doesn't know who this guy is, but he gradually starts merging into the identity of Kevin Finnerty. Yeah. Right. And to the point where everyone's like, you're Kevin Finnerty now. Right. And there's a point where, and it's very telling. I feel like they were reading Buddhist texts or maybe Yoga Vashishta or something like that when they were writing this episode. The show in general does have a slight obsession with Buddhism in general. I think so. They talk about it in previous episodes. He's having an affair with a Buddhist chick and this and that and the other thing. Tangentially,
but Michael Imperioli is like went and studied Buddhism quite deeply, I think.
Yes, actually. He did. Yeah. Yes, he did. And so he's now all merging now into this identity of a Kevin Finnerty as well. So now we have three different versions of Tony Soprano. There's Tony, then there's the nameless Tony, and now there's Kevin Finnerty, whose briefcase and baggage, literal baggage, he is now carrying, right? And then, he's at the gate of his final transformation, which is the Finnerty family reunion that he's supposed to go into. And there's many ways you can interpret this scene in The Sopranos. But he sees his cousin that he had just recently killed is there outside this thing. He's like, hey, do you want to come on in? And he's like, yeah, maybe. He's like, well, you got to leave your baggage here. You got to leave all your stuff here. There's no briefcases allowed in here. And Tony's like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to stay. And that's the moment that he comes out of the coma.
Yeah.
To me, that's dharmic as shit, That's dharmic as hell. And I think there's a lot more unpacking that can go on in that, but these were just kind of my initial mental scribblings as I was watching this episode of The Sopranos. There's 2 episodes of The Sopranos. I think it's episode 67 and 68, if anybody is interested. But to me, this is just the story of Leela, right? In another kind of form with some modifications there. But this is purely the story of Leela that's happening, multiple timelines, and I think that's fascinating. I just wanted to share that. It was just so striking to me.
I think if you look at a lot of gangster movies as well, they all deal with questions of dharma even if they don't know that they are. It's kind of just like implanted in the condition of gangster films.
It is. And it's always like a Rakshasa's dharma though, right? Because there's always actually, their struggle is actually, hey, how do I have the guts to do what's wrong? You know what I mean? Because there's always the tension between their family, their actual family, and then their mafia family.
Yeah.
Right? That's a very persistent theme.
Yeah.
So I think gangster movies are a good, because, these are...
Whether it's adharmic or dharmic is interesting to me though. Because you could say, like we've talked about this maybe last two episodes ago, like Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu were kind of sent to live out that dharma.
Right.
Right?
You're right.
And like being bad, it's kind of like how no one is really bad or good. People always see themselves as being righteous, sort of, in their actions.
Yeah. And they're living, and I think the key thing is that they're living according to their essence.
Yes.
Right? And what is his essence? He's a gangster. Thus, he must just be a gangster.
I think that, and that is kind of how it ends too, right? He chooses just the end of the Leela episode.
Yeah.
He chooses to go back to Tony.
He chooses to go back to Tony. That's actually his dharma. And I think that's a great point, actually. To say it's adharmic is maybe not actually the correct way of phrasing it.
Yeah, I think it's like, and I think this is the I haven't read enough of like the Ashtavakra Gita. It's something I'm looking into right now because I want to, but something that struck me just from like reading about it was that it's like, it steps away from morality and right or wrong, which is, the Gita and then the Ramayana, for instance, are both they have different takes on morality.
Yes.
But it's morality driven nonetheless.
Yeah. I mean, the Ramayana is a tale of somebody who is the perfect moral being, the perfectly dharmic being, which is Lord Rama. He's the perfect man. And that's what we're hearing. The Mahabharata, though, is about the conflicts in terms of pursuing Dharma,
100%.
right? In the pursuit of Dharma, which is why people love the Mahabharata more in many ways. It's a much more interesting story in many ways. Although, don't sleep on the Valmiki Ramayana. It is a I
need to get into that.
Wild ride. I love it. It's so good. Everything in the Sundarkand is just pure gold. Actually, throughout it all, it's like pretty gold, There's a lot of repetition and stuff. And he went to this ashram, and he went to this ashram, and he went to this ashram, and so on. But great read nonetheless. But yeah, Tony's a gangster and he's living his gangster's dharma. That's what it is. Because we all are here in Maya, right? Even in the Yoga Vishishta, it's like, don't abandon what you do in this life. The point is to do it with a sense of renunciation, and that's how you liberate yourself from further births.
Right.
So if you're a gangster, that's your role apparently in this Maya, right? This Maya Leela, I guess we can call it.
I think so. Yeah.
Tony Soprano, dharmic AF. Who knew? Who knew? Who knew? Hey, I'm achieving moksha over here.
And next week we talk about, does Walter White fall off his dharmic path?
Well, it's like the thing is like it feels adharmic because these guys, especially the gangsters, they're addicted. It's all the ahamkara that's driving them, right? Whereas the morals, the actual lesson of the Gita and the lesson of all these things is no, you detach from your ahamkara and you just do your duty. It's like, it's very complicated stuff, right? We're not going to unpack all that now.